This article is from Newsela. It was originally published by the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History in 2016, and it's called The Americas to 1620, North America on the Eve of the European Invasion. Around the year 1450, a young man was living alone in the dense forest southeast of Lake Ontario because there was not enough food in his home village. Many like him were doing the same, and some, perhaps even this young man, were killing other men for food. As the story goes, he was butchering a fresh kill when he was confronted by a stranger. The young man's name was Hiawatha, sometimes spelled Ianwatha or Hiawatha, and the stranger was called Dekunawida. Hiawatha had lived among the Mohawk Nation of Iroquois Native Americans, and Dekunawida was from the Wendat, sometimes called the Huron Nation. The Wendat were also Iroquois, but fierce rivals of the Mohawks. Dekunawida claimed he was on a mission given to him by a spirit called Peacemaker to unite all Iroquois into a great and peaceful nation. Weather changes led to conflict and desperation. Like most of the Indians living between the Rocky Mountains and the Atlantic Ocean, the Iroquois had for generations been living peacefully in their villages on the corn that women grew and the game that men hunted. War was infrequent and famine all but unknown. But in the years just before Hiawatha's birth, all that had begun to unravel as a long-lasting natural change in the weather hurt the corn harvest. To survive, the people were forced to hunt and gather more wild foods. As hunters roamed more deeply into the forest, they encountered others who were also desperate. Conflicts became common. There was peril, and everywhere mourning, says one version of the story. Feuds with outer nations and feuds with brother nations, feuds of sister towns and feuds of families and clans made every warrior a stealthy man who liked to kill. Following Decunawida's advice, Hiawatha moved back among the Mohawks, married, and began telling the people about Peacemaker's message. Some opposed him, but Hiawatha, undaunted, tried to think of some way to convince his enemies to accept the idea of cooperation. He wove a belt of wampum shell strings that showed the great chain connecting the 5 northern Iroquois nations: Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. Carrying his belt, Hiawatha traveled among the 5 nations, telling them that they could survive only if they ceased fighting among themselves. It is said that he finally won over the Onondaga chief by asking him to break an arrow, which the chief easily did, and then asking him to break a bundle of 5 arrows, which the chief could not. The other leaders of the 5 nations created a confederation government that Europeans later would call the League of the Iroquois, or Haudenosaunee. Widespread alliances formed in North America. Hiawatha's story is remarkable, but far from unique. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that widespread alliances were forming throughout North America at this time. In the central Mississippi Valley, for example, large, thriving cities had been around since 900. Near the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, across from what is now St. Louis, the city of Cahokia had a population of about 40,000 and controlled territory housing, many more. Cahokia experienced a long string of natural and human-caused disasters. Around 1200, the city was struck by a ferocious earthquake that did terrific damage. The city went on to experience massive flooding, mudslides, and crop destruction because of the change in this weather. After 1400, the people in the region began to scatter. Climate change began to affect other groups, including the Algonquin people living along the coast of Virginia. Around 1550, a child was born in one of the villages who was later known as Wahunsukkakak, or the Powhatan. Europeans brought weapons and disease. Throughout Wahun Sonsakak's life, conditions grew continuously worse. In addition to the bad weather, conflicts between confederations became common. More troubling were the odd-looking strangers who began to arrive in ever greater numbers. Most times, these strangers seemed just to be exploring the coastline and various river inlets, while other times they seemed interested in trading goods. Sometimes they came wrapped in metal and carrying loud, deadly sticks that could kill a man at a long distance. Frequently, they took away women and children who were never seen again. And what was worse, shortly after the appearances of these strangers, people in the villages became sick, and a great many died. Wohun Sunsakak became an Algonquin chief and decided that the nation must either expand or die. By 1607, when the mysterious strangers began to settle permanently in the region, he built a little 6-village alliance into nearly 30 villages over about 8,000 square miles. The observations recorded by the Europeans led to long-standing impressions that Native Americans were continuously at war. But what these European settlers saw was the product of a particular moment in time, one of adjustment and adaptation to new conditions, not unlike what was going on in Europe. However, Europe would not experience foreigners bringing new technologies, animals, and diseases to the native populations, turning crisis into disaster.